This next week, you'll be revising to turn in the final draft of your paper. And so, what I want you to consider as you revise is this discussion on logical fallacies. And, we haven't talked a lot about them this semester. They're in the Jones article. She calls them pragmadialectics, and that's obviously not a term, you're probably familiar with. You've probably heard of, say the slippery slope fallacy, where we watch the DirecTV commercial and your DirecTV forgot to pay the bill, and by the end of the commercial, the person is laying in the ditch on the side of the road, all because they forgot to pay their DirecTV bill. And so that's a slippery slope fallacy. And those are funny. They're good for commercials. When we watch debates, we can see politicians really engage in what we call ad hominem attacks. That's where they start attacking the person rather than the issue. And so fallacies are important not only for how we use them and how we may use them in our papers, but how they exist in this world, and it's important for us to recognize them. So last week, or Monday, I went to the Japanese internment panel presentation in the Forum Hall, and it was really interesting. They had a couple of people speaking about their experiences in the camp, and one of the men speaking talked about Chief Justice Earl Warren and how basically his evidence, his testimony, his logical fallacy really contributed to the 4-year internment of the Japanese Americans in concentration camps. And so I want to show you that remark. And so Earl Warren at this point was not the Chief Justice. He was not even on the Supreme Court. It was even before he was governor of California. This is in February of 1942, I think just after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And he makes the infamous statement that the complete absence of sabotage by Japanese Americans was itself evidence that such sabotage was forthcoming. So he says, "It seems to me that it is quite significant that in this great state of ours, California, we have had no fifth column activities," meaning espionage, spying, any kind of sabotage. What they're talking about, like ships being wrecked and things happening on the Pacific Ocean. So he said, "It looks very much to me as though it is a studied effort not to have any until the 0 hour arrives." So look at the problems and logic in that statement. How can we say that the complete absence of evidence indicates that something will happen? And, again, you have to remember there were very severe consequences to this. 120,000 people were imprisoned, their homes taken away, looted, destroyed, they lost property, they lost entire lives. And Earl Warren does, in his memoirs in 1977, he apologizes for his role in that, but I think it's really important to look at our own logic, what influences it. Obviously what influenced a lot of this was what we would call a hasty generalization, another logical fallacy, a type of stereotyping and prejudice that existed at that time. So what I want to talk today about is more so the kinds of fallacies that we might engage in our own papers. And I'm going to post these videos along with this one so you can click on them. But these two types of fallacies that I see most often are what we call the black and white fallacy and the straw man fallacy. And both of these have to do with oversimplifying. So the black and white fallacy really deals with giving people two propositions. It's not this, so therefore it is this. Where generally there's lots of room in the middle, and that is what we've talked about this semester, right? From the very beginning, the argument as war metaphor opens up those opposing sides, and realistically, we know that we can concede certain things, that then we can refute certain things, and that we don't generally agree or disagree with someone's entire argument, but we may acknowledge parts of it. And so your paper should really embrace that complexity. And that's one reason the word count is so long, because without a long word count like that, you cannot reach that kind of complexity for your topic. Straw man is another form of oversimplifying. And it really deals with changing the issue slightly so that you're no longer addressing the argument at hand, but you are arguing something slightly different. So I think those are very important fallacies. So go ahead, you can watch those videos. The guy is pretty funny. If you put them into YouTube, you can find other videos and examples that will show those. There are other fallacies, and you can look in chapter 10 of your book, and I have seen some of them this semester. Sometimes I see appeal to tradition, right? We've always done it this way, therefore we should continue to do it that way. Where in reality, I mean, there's lots of new ideas and solutions and new events that occur that change the way we do things. And so appeal to tradition, to do something just because that is the way we've done it, is not logic. Okay? It is not a good argument in and of itself. It doesn't mean we cannot appeal to tradition, but we have to provide other evidence that shows that this is still the best way to continue to do this. Non sequitur means does not follow. And so that's essentially where we give some sort of evidence, and then the conclusion that comes from it does not follow. I also see this in students' papers. Usually that's just a misuse of sources. Begging the question. So if I ask you, so when did you quit smoking? And you think, but I don't smoke. That's essentially begging the question. Okay? You're assuming the answer before you start. Okay, red herring is, there is no such thing as a red herring, and that's where that name comes from. And so sort of throw something into the middle of the argument that diverts attention from the argument and is not the real issue. Okay, finally we have the fallacy. And again, this is not something that I would necessarily see in your paper. We want to avoid logical fallacies. But we don't always reject arguments simply because there is a fallacy there. And this, again, goes more, for life. We have to really look at, is the conclusion drawn true? And not make the argument about the evidence or about the fallacy or dismissing the person. And so we'll end it on that, but take these into consideration as you begin to revise your paper and revising for the oversimplification of your topic. Keep your topic complex.